because of all of the publicity, the campaign around Max and Kiera's law, Kiera's family worked out that her heart had gone to Max, and they messaged via Facebook, and Kiera's mum sent Max's mum a message that said, "I think that Max has my daughter's heart. It's the most beautiful heart in the world." And they met, and Kiera's family ended up with a stethoscope listening to their daughter's heart beating inside the chest of the boy whose life they had saved.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, what a book. What a book. Profoundly moving and at the same time wildly inspiring. A beautiful, humane book, says Rob Delaney, of this book and this next author who's with us this morning. I say, here, Rob Delaney. I could not have put it any better. Vassos, over to you.
Our next guest comes with the biggest mascara warning, but feels like a great big hug. She's the palliative care doctor and best-selling author whose latest book, The Story of a Heart, is out today. So please welcome a woman who always hits the mark. It's Rachel Clarke.
Rachel, congratulations. I mean, what a book.
Thank you so much. What a story, I guess, because the moment I heard about these two families, these two children, I knew that I was learning the most amazing story I'd ever hear.
Yeah, and you've told it so well. And not only have you told their story, but you've told about the evolution, the revolution in organ donation and transplantation. Can you just give us the main tentpoles of the kid's story, first of all?
Yeah, so basically, there was a little boy called Max who was just normal, healthy, and then gradually became sick, stopped being able to play sport at school, and suddenly crashed, ended up in hospital with a seriously damaged heart, probably from a virus that any of us could have picked up.
And one of the ways that Rachel, I'll be going to press pause there for a second. One of the ways you gently portray that particular story are with little vignettes like Max one day asked the teacher, could he referee the football match he was supposed to play in because he couldn't run around as much as he wanted to, but he didn't want to let on that was happening. Things like that, which make it so relatable.
Exactly. And all the way through, Max is a child who's protecting his parents.
Yeah.
So he gets really sick, ends up in hospital. His family are told he needs a heart transplant, 30% chance of dying, 30% chance of needing a transplant, 30% chance of surviving. And then it's a waiting game, and he gets sicker and sicker and sicker. He's on death's door. And then tragedy strikes another family, little Kiera Ball, 9 years old as well, in a car crash. And she's rushed to hospital in Bristol, but her injuries mean that she's brain dead. And incredibly, the very instant her family learn that, Kiera's little sister, Caitlin, who's 11 years old herself, looks at the ICU doctor straight in the eye and says, "Can we donate Kiera's organs?" And imagine an 11-year-old being brave enough to do that. And she says, this is what Kiera would have wanted. She's the kindest girl in the world. She would give us her last sweets. And then the clock is ticking, and these two families start to become entwined through this incredible journey that Kiera's heart takes. It has to be surgically removed. It has to fly across the country. The organ donation service are teeing up all these different teams all over the country. It's the NHS at its absolute finest, and then miraculously it ends up inside the chest of little Max and saves his life.
And along with that, everything else, all the other gold that's in the book. Let's stay at the end of the story first, if you don't mind. Let's talk about Max and Kiera's law.
So this is amazing. So I learned about their story because one day in 2017, Max appeared on the front page of the Mirror newspaper as part of a campaign to change the law around organ donation to make it easier to donate organs, because every year children die because there's no organ. So I saw this little boy, blue eyes, white blonde hair, looking so sick. And then a month or two later, there he was again on the front page, pink and lively, given his life by Kiera. And they campaigned, they lobbied the Prime Minister, Theresa May, and eventually in 2020, Max and Kiera's law was introduced in the UK, which has led to thousands of more people becoming organ donors, going onto the organ list. And it's just a living legacy. There are people today whose lives are still being saved by Max and Kiera because of the change in the law.
And talk about touch and go. You know, an organ transplant, potential organ transplant situation has so many touch and go moments. You know, it's a miracle. It's a miracle that it can be done in the first place, and how it all came to be possible because of the egomaniacal surgeons of the past, by their own admission.
Yes.
You know, doing things that you wouldn't be allowed to do now, but without which we couldn't do what we are allowed to do now and save people's lives. It's an extraordinary story, isn't it?
It really is. And I read about these guys, and they are
Give us the three headlines there.
So 1960s.
Yeah.
Everybody was obsessed with a race, right? The space race. We're going to get a man on the moon. But there was this other race, the race to be the first to transplant a heart. And that too was on the front page of Time magazine. And Christian Barnard, the man who got there first and transplanted the first heart, became a global superstar. He was absolutely like those first astronauts. And he was a maverick. He fought tooth and nail. The colleagues, all of these surgeons, were fighting each other to be first. They ended up locked in battle. Patients, in a way, were secondary to these thrusting egos, and they revelled in being heroes. They wanted people to think of them as superstar heroes, and it's so different to today, and it's a fascinating story to tell.
It's so gripping. And before you get to the 60s, you talk about organ donation anyway, and how people did it, you know, which were the first organs to be transplanted, where did they get the right needles, where did they get the right thread that wouldn't destroy the cells with which he was trying to save.
Yes, so 100 years ago, the idea of organ donation was science fiction, couldn't possibly be done. No doctor thought it could be done, partly because anybody who had an injury to their heart, especially, you just died. You couldn't possibly cut into a human heart because it's moving, it's beating. And nobody could stitch blood vessels together. And then another maverick surgeon found an embroiderer, a famous embroidery person in Paris, and said, teach me how you do such good embroidery. Delicate embroidery. And then he transferred the skills to blood vessels.
Crazy.
And the immunosuppressants that people now use so that their organs survive.
Their transplanted organs which your body is always trying to reject because it's not yours.
They were discovered because a drug company in the 1960s said to all its staff, whenever you go on holiday, bring back soil samples because penicillin is a mould. We might find another really good drug in your soil. And cyclosporin, the wonder drug that's enabled transplantation, literally came back in the suitcase of an employee who went on holiday and brought back a bit of soil and said, there you go, maybe there's something in there.
God bless Norway. And who goes on holiday to Norway? Oh, then, you know, I mean, you've been, and it's really nice. I want to go, but I've not been. So, you know.
But if you do, you know what to bring back.
So, yeah, bring all the soil back.
Soil,
yeah. Anyway, yeah. Gosh. Lots of stories about America. Lots of stories about Atlas, the Atlas checklist. The guy the doctor who was on his motorbike, had he been in a car, none of this would have happened.
Absolutely.
Just give us more. Just tell us more about the book.
So I think one of the most incredible things about the book is how unlikely it ever is for a single organ to make it into a recipient.
How it ever happens.
So when Kiera's crash happened, there was an off-duty new doctor, hadn't even done his first year of medicine, on a motorbike, saw smoke, traffic at a standstill. And the only reason he got to Kiera was because A, he was on a motorbike so he could weave through the traffic, and B, he thought to myself, well, I'd better go and see if I can help. And he got the public doing chest compressions on Kiera. He told them how to do it properly. If he hadn't have been there, her heart that they were keeping beating with chest compressions wouldn't have survived. Incredible. And then little Max, there's a moment when he's been on the waiting list for so long, he's so demoralised. He's already had a mechanical pump fitted into his heart to keep it going. And he reaches the stage where he thinks, I can't do it anymore. It's just too hard. I feel too rotten. And there's a moment described in the book with Max and his parents' permission where he actually decides that he's going to try and end his life, and he tries to pull out the pump and goes to intensive care with an infection that's been caused by that. And a year later, he played a little video to his mum that he recorded at the time where this little boy is saying, I can't do it anymore. I'm going to end things. I can't do it. And that just gives a flavour of how high the stakes are, even in the surgery. So Asif Hassan, Max's heart surgeon, a legend in Europe, one of the best in Europe. There's a moment in the surgery when suddenly he nicks an artery and you literally see blood spurting across the operating theatre, and he has to decide in a split second what to do to save Max's life. And do you know what he does? He sticks his finger in the hole.
Totally.
And that's what every surgeon does in that situation.
Yeah.
And then brilliantly...
Because you can't see because of the blood, so you've got to stop the blood because the blood blinds you.
Exactly. You're blinded by blood. You can't see a thing. So you put your finger in the hole and then by feel, by touch, without even having any sight, you stitch the hole up.
And it goes on and on and on, doesn't it? There's one surgeon you talk about who once he'd sort of perfected his craft, perfected his craft as much as one can perfect this kind of surgery, then proceeded to carry out 60,000 procedures. And I was doing the maths. I thought, hey, that's impossible. You can't carry out 60,000 of those operations within a single lifetime. But of course, these people do that because they know that every time they enter a theatre, they may well, and now more often than not, thank God, save a human being's life.
Yes, absolutely. And there's something about the flip side of the massive egos in some of these early surgeons especially is this incredible commitment to their cause. They are so single-minded, their marriages fall by the wayside. They're hated often by everyone else in the hospital because they're so rude and abrasive, but they're utterly single-mindedly devoted to their craft. And even today, a modern heart surgeon like Asif Hassan, he spent 6 months of his life on call. For 6 months, night and day, 7 days a week, if somebody needed emergency heart transplant surgery or any heart surgery, he would be called. And for 6 months, he couldn't go on holiday, he couldn't leave Newcastle. That's the commitment. And for all of that dedication, he would then go home at the end of a 24-hour shift, and get abuse from his family for being lazy. There's a wonderful story where his little girl, his daughter, saw him sort of dozing on the sofa, having spent 24 hours operating on somebody's heart. And he said, could you get me a glass of water? And his little girl turns around and says, no, Daddy, you're just so lazy. You get it yourself. You're a lazy man, and stomps off. So they're kind of heroes, but simultaneously ordinary people doing the most incredible work in the NHS.
It's crazy. When we all step over the threshold of our own home, nobody apart from ourselves has a clue what we went through that day, whether it's extraordinary, whether it's extraordinary.
Exactly. And I think that was one of the things that I wanted to do with the book, was sort of throw open the doors of this world that we can't imagine. I mean, I've watched this surgery as part of my research.
Oh my gosh.
To take a scalpel and cut into a child's chest, to literally lift a child's heart out of their chest and remove it, not knowing if you're going to successfully put in the new heart, is incredible.
I can imagine and I can't imagine at the same time.
Yeah.
And the thing about organ transplantation is it's the heart that keeps everything else going when you are having organ transplants of a different flavour. But when it's the thing that keeps everything going that you're taking out, that's when it just goes to a whole different level.
Exactly. And so what happens is you connect up the patient to a heart-lung machine.
Well, you do now.
You do now.
You didn't used to. Because you also, in your book, in this book, is also the history of ventilation.
Yes.
Just give us the sort of, again, the beginnings of ventilation,
so
modern-day ventilation.
This is incredible. We're all very familiar with ventilators from the COVID pandemic. Ventilators didn't exist until the 1950s, and then the big virus that scared people was polio, because if you caught polio, it could paralyse all of your muscles, including the muscles of breathing, and children especially were affected and died. Thousands of children every year were in a polio epidemic. And one year in 1952 in Copenhagen, there was a doctor and anaesthetist whose hospital was overwhelmed with polio, children dying everywhere. They had one iron lung with a child in it to keep that child alive. He had another little girl called Vivi who was going to die in front of him. And in desperation, he thought, why don't I manually use a bag and squeeze air into her lungs? Her muscles can't do it, I'll do it. And he did that, and it worked. And then suddenly he realised we could do this for everybody. He got all the medical students in Copenhagen manually ventilating with a bag.
And anybody else passing?
Yeah, anybody.
Yeah.
Hundreds and hundreds of patients.
1,500 people?
1,500 people, kept them alive. And then, of course, they realised we can make a machine that does this. We don't need hundreds of medical students. And the first ventilators were born.
And
Absolutely
what
amazing.
about the dad that kept his child alive because he breathed for the child?
Yes.
This is
yes.
another amazing story.
Again, so in the early days of cardiac surgery, doctors were trying to come up with crazy, imaginative, outlandish ways to operate on the heart. It's so difficult because it keeps moving all of the time. And one idea they had was you could connect a child's blood supply to their parent. So an artery would connect to a parent's artery, a vein to a parent's vein, and the blood would flow out of the child through the parent's lungs, back in again. And meanwhile, the surgeons could do open heart surgery on the child's heart.
And it happened.
And it was called cross circulation.
Oh
it was literally done on hundreds and hundreds of children successfully. Amazing.
I mean, totally amazing. Get so many messages for you.
But the most amazing thing above all of this
Yes.
is Kiera's family. In that moment of absolute tragedy, Kiera's dad, Joe, and her siblings made this decision to be selfless, to be altruistic, to save other people. And I just think that is the absolute best of human nature.
Well, Joe can speak to that. Morning, Chris and the gang. Mascara warning here, everyone. My 16-year-old son was knocked over by a motorbike 8 years ago. He donated 5 organs, including his heart. I'd give anything to meet the recipients, but unfortunately, they're not ready to meet us. And that's how it works, isn't it?
Yes. So normally, recipient and donor families never meet because the emotional consequences are really hard to predict, and it's really to protect the families. But in this case, because of all of the publicity, the campaign around Max and Kiera's law, Kiera's family worked out that her heart had gone to Max, and they messaged via Facebook, and Kiera's mum sent Max's mum a message that said, I think that Max has my daughter's heart. It's the most beautiful heart in the world. And they met, and Kiera's family ended up with a stethoscope listening to their daughter's heart beating inside the chest of the boy whose life they had saved.
I mean, the book's great, but you're great about the book as well. Because there's one thing writing it, and there's another thing talking about it. You all right there? They're all in bits. Understandably. Nikki in Aberdeen. I'm donating my kidney on the 18th of September. It's a 3-way swap, so my kidney comes out in Edinburgh and goes to Wales. The Welsh donor donates to someone else in England, and the England donor gives my nephew in Edinburgh his kidney. It's incredible. Wishes all luck.
Amazing. And you see, right there, that is what the NHS is still doing behind the scenes, despite everything. We hear bad news stories about the NHS, but isn't it phenomenal to think of what Nikki and all the teams involved in that 3-way surgery are achieving? It's phenomenal.
Callie from Shrewsbury, I've been listening to you talking about organ transplantation this morning. Please have a look at the Race for Recipients, which takes place every year to raise awareness around organ donation. A fun, non-competitive race. You say it's non-competitive. They're all competitive somewhere. To try and clock up as many kilometres as you can over a week. Beautiful. Thank you, Kelly. I am 6 years post-double lung transplant, having just enjoyed the summer holidays, taking my 10-year-old twins on their first holiday abroad, as well as swimming and teaching them both to ride a bike. Heading on weekends away with my partner and working for Parkinson's UK. Basically, I'm living a normal life. Prior to this, I was a 32-year-old in a mobility scooter, unable to play with my children. Transplants works. It doesn't matter if I passed away tomorrow. I've had 6 amazing years. Well done for sharing this amazing story of organ donation, James from Hastings.
Wow.
You're getting so much love for this book.
That is it, isn't it? Right there, that life.
It's the little stories, though. I mean, that you tell such a good tale, and this
really
lovely
do.
story of Max and Kiera. It's, you know, you could talk about it on the sort of the theoretical, aren't we amazing as human beings and what we've discovered and how we can help and save others' lives with organ donation. But it's the little things that got me, and I was in absolute floods of tears. Little things. The ICU nurses and doctors who decide to do as Max lies there really, really ill, they just decided that yes, he needs huge medical care, but he also needs his pecker up a bit, and so they do this silly song and dance in front of him, and and that sort of thing's going on in hospitals all around the world.
Exactly.
And it just makes you think, oh, these wonderful, wonderful people just making other people's lives better.
Exactly. And the idea that a tiny little act of kindness like that takes nothing, costs us nothing, it can change everything for a patient. So there's another beautiful example of that, is where Kiera goes to have her retrieval surgery, and it's heartbreaking for her family. And her dad, Joe, decides he wants her to look beautiful, and he goes off to a department store in Bristol and he chooses a party dress for her. And after the surgery, the nurses stay in the operating theatre and they wash her hair and they rub scented hand cream into her nails and they dress her in a party dress. And meanwhile, the ICU nurses decorate her room with fairy lights and beautiful, beautiful things for a little girl. So when her family see her, she's a princess, an absolute princess. And I think that's not high stakes medicine, but it's
high stakes life.
It's intensive care of the humankind, and it's precious, and it means everything.
Meantime, a pilot is waiting in a plane.
Yes.
In a parallel universe.
Yes.
To transport the organ to where it needs to go.
Yes.
At 200 miles an hour.
Yes.
So it's crazy. Like you say, the fact this ever happens, let alone successfully, is a real life daily miracle.
Exactly. You don't need to believe in God. This is a miracle that is happening right here, right now, every single day. And the teams who retrieve the organs as well are incredible. They will get a call in the middle of the night and they'll be told, okay, off you go, drive 200 miles. And on the way, they'll be preparing themselves. They'll be going through every detail of the case. And then when they go into theatre, the teams treat the organ donor with such respect. There's a moment of honour where everybody stands, and the chief organ specialist nurse will say, we're all here to honour and give thanks to this person who has given this absolute gift to save others. And the respect is so amazing. And even the cardiac surgeons, the people who used to be these ambitious mavericks in the 1960s, now they have this humility. So Asif Hassan, who, could think of himself as a rock star, when I spoke to him, he said, Rachel, I'm just a bus driver. What happens is the heart comes to me, I pick it up in theatre, and I do my bit of the journey. I'm the driver, I drive it to the end, and then someone else takes over. And my part is no more or less important than anyone else's.
We said it on the show yesterday, if you are considering yourself a big shot, you need to work your way up to servant. And that's what he does. Completely.
And I just think, if there is one thing that if there were two messages, one is chat to your families about organ donation. Ask your kids. Any kid, you ask them how they would feel, they say, of course I would want to be a donor. Kiera's mum goes into schools and talks to kids and they all say, I want to be a donor. Ask your kids what they think. And 2, never forget that those little acts of kindness that people never forget, you don't need to be a doctor or a nurse. We can all do that, and it takes nothing. It takes a second, and it can transform that person's day, maybe even their life.
It's an extraordinary book. Adam Kay says it's an extraordinary story, beautifully told, and The Guardian says Rachel Clarke's words are brimful of love, grace and kindness. Where did you get that from? Because they're bang on. I mean, this book is a perfect book.
Well, I think I specialise in palliative medicine, so I work...
I know all that, but where do you get it from in your soul? Sorry, with respect. Professionally, you're completely qualified.
Yeah.
But where does your vocation come from?
I think a lot of it has to do with my dad. As I grew up, I, like lots of little girls, hero worship my dad, who was a doctor. And I remember when I was really young, him telling me some of the stories about his patients. And one was he had a family and the 2 children, one after the other, got leukemia when they were little children. And as Dad told me this story, he started to cry. And I remember that I was only about 7 or 8. And I remember understanding how much he cared about his patients and what a good thing that was. And I think I just always wanted to help people. I wanted to try and help people in a very simple way. And ultimately, I just think the only thing that really matters at the end of life is the people you love and how you've treated them, and all the other stuff, money and power and status and so on. None of that matters at all. Are you someone who can look yourself in the eye and feel, I tried my bit?
How you left those people is who you were when you were still there.
Yeah.
How and who.
That's the only legacy that counts.
All right. You're great. You are. It's a great story. It's an unbelievable story. It's so emotional, but it's so inspiring. And it has its humour. The humour's in there, isn't it? Of course it is. Rachel, thank you.
Thank you so much.
When's the book out? Is it today?
Today. It's today.
Launch day today. So many more WhatsApps for you. Rachel Clarke, control a round of applause, please, if you don't mind. Thank you very much indeed. Really big one. You're great. You're amazing. Virgin Radio.